Introduce yourself, who you are, who you represent.
Yeah, my name is John Samuel, and I work for an organization called LCI, and we are the largest employer of people who are blind. But I came on board a couple of years ago to create technology-based jobs.
Oh, okay.
So that's what we're trying to create, that upper mobility, because although manufacturing is a noble profession, it's not necessarily the right job for everyone.
For people who can't see.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, how is it that you see people who can't see being enabled to do work in technology?
Yeah, so years ago, accessibility on a phone or on a computer was not available or was very expensive. Now, as computer and technology has increased, and we now have accessibility built into our cell phones, we have free versions of screen readers for our computers. This has now lowered that barrier, which was the cost of assistive technology.
Yeah.
Now more people can access it, more people can use it. Kids are getting more education because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, we're going to see more young people coming out of high school better equipped for the workforce.
So it's filtering down to the school level, because up until now they had limits on what they could learn.
Exactly. When you look at some of the stats on the high school students for the blind community, I believe there's only around 60% of people who are blind were graduating from high school.
Mm-hmm.
And only around 25% were going to college, and only 10% were graduating.
Now, I know that there are people who are born blind,
Yeah.
and then there are people who are blinded because of an accident or an injury.
Yeah.
But then I believe you your blindness evolved over time.
Yeah.
Right? So can you explain the distinction between those three ways that people lose their sight and how they function differently in terms of adapting?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people who are think that majority of people are born blind, but that's not the case. Most people are going to be generating a disease or illness that's causing people to lose their vision over a period of time. In the aging population, macular degeneration is a very common source of blindness. And in my case, I have something called retinitis pigmentosa. And I'm no scientist, but the best way I can describe it is macular degeneration for children. And so
Okay.
I started losing my sight really noticeably when I was in college, and I started losing my sight. So, and then you have individuals, like you said, who have an accident that all of a sudden they've lost their sight, and now they're having to learn how to deal with that. But in my case, where not knowing until college that I was losing my sight, it can be a mental challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a amount of stress that you just don't know what's coming. You know you're going to be blind. It's just, when is it going to happen?
Yeah.
So it can be challenging.
I experienced something similar because I had eyelids that would go down. My eyelids drooped.
Yeah.
And then I had cataracts.
Yep.
And it got to the point where I had that feeling of I'm losing my eyesight, and I had to buy bigger screens for my computer. I got Dragon software to
Yes.
kind of think about how I could listen and write, because so much of my work is reading and writing. And so I really, for a while, panicked until I went and got operations, and they fixed my eyelids and they fixed my cataract. And it used to be I couldn't read a menu, anything.
Yeah.
Even if I put glasses on, it was getting so bad. It was kind of like a situation of, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Because so much of what I do is about reading and writing. And so fortunately for me, it worked out. But I can imagine for people like you, it's kind of like it will eventually happen. And that's true now for aging people my age, and the baby boom generation.
Yep.
Some are beginning to have that happen. But how do you feel that situation differs from somebody who's blind from birth?
So I think when you're born blind, you learn, the world that's all you've known. You've grown up in this blind world. You've figured out ways around, workarounds. You've figured out solutions, and so that you don't know any other way of doing something. And versus somebody who was sighted and starts to lose it, just like you talked about, there's that fear, is like, what's going to happen to me? Because you've learned we live in such a visual world that you can only imagine that, oh, one sentence is gone, what am I going to do? How am I going to navigate through this world that you have to see? But when you realize it, as you kind of come to grips like myself, it took me many years to come to grips with it, I realized that there's so many tools out there that I can leverage those tools to be able to complete the task that I always needed to do my job, to live my life, to raise my family, to go out and enjoy life. But the key thing is that the people who design and build this, they need to be thinking about what are we doing to make sure that all people can access this. And so it really comes back to that foundational, the design phase, is that people need to be thinking about accessibility from that stage.
I know, with the Parasite winning the movie, and that was in subtitles.
Yep.
And that there was some people who reacted and said that subtitles are distracting.
Yeah.
And but then there are those who argue that dubbing doesn't necessarily make it any easier. But there were some editorials I read from people from the deaf community who said, "Well, welcome to our world."
Yeah.
But they also pointed out, because this is true for me, because we had a neighbor who constantly complained about sound from our, condo.
Yeah.
So we started to watch movies with subtitles so we could keep the volume down. And now we always watch movies with subtitles because sometimes, especially with British movies, even though they speak English, they don't really speak American English.
Yeah.
And they have such accents that you don't get everything. So,
Yeah.
so that was the point that they were making. So it rather than saying it's exceptional to have subtitles, that when you go to the movies, it should be, the norm.
Yeah.
And that it would make it easier for people who have hearing impairments to enjoy movies more. So I just found that an interesting way of seeing that some accommodations can be beneficial to everybody. I think you read the articles I wrote where I talked about, having ramps in restaurants versus stairs and having good lighting.
Yep.
Not only would be good for people who have visual impairments, but for servers who have to carry trays. If you have stairs, they're more likely to fall, which increases the risk of an injury, which costs workers' comp. So in some ways, by making your facilities more accessible for people who have visual impairments, you could reduce the costs of your operation. And then equally so with wheelchairs. The more you make wheelchairs accommodating in restaurants or on sidewalks or on the street, now you have this millennial generation of people having babies and multiple babies, so they have the double wide, strollers. And if your streets and your restaurants and your restrooms don't accommodate the parents, then you're going to lose that business. So sometimes the outcomes for creating accessibility for one group actually expands not only potentials for others, but profitability for businesses.
Exactly. I often use the wheelchair ramp situation because my wife and I, we fall in that millennial group with the double stroller, and we look at restaurants or other venues that have a wheelchair ramp or an accessibility ramp that we can come in there with our stroller, because if it doesn't have that, we're not coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of those cases that it's something that's going to benefit everybody, and not just one group of people.
So that's the saying I've heard, that people don't have disabilities, it's the environment that's disabled.
Yeah, that's the social construct of disabilities, is that the individual is not the one with the disability, it's just the world that we live in isn't built.
Mm-hmm. Isn't built to accommodate.
Yeah. And so that's the social contract, and I think that's what, it goes back to that foundational, the design component. When we're designing things or building something, are we thinking about universal design and design for everybody in mind when we're doing that?
Yeah, I know when I worked in construction, most of the carpenters were tall.
Yeah.
So when they had to place something on the wall, they would place it so that it would be eyesight.
Yep.
But for women who are mostly short, they have to reach up for whatever it is that they put in, so they don't think about that from the perspective. They only design things for their own point of view.
Yeah.
So we're here at the Sociable City Summit, and so sociability is our theme. So if we could conclude kind of with the discussion about not only the whole concept of sociability and the people who have impairments in one way or the other. And the purpose of this event, what do you think some important lessons are that you'll be talking about in terms of creating cities that are more sociable for people who may have some impairments?
Yeah, and when I started thinking about this, I speak on a lot of different diversity and inclusion events and groups, and when I thought about it in the context of this event, I thought about the fact about fitting in or belonging. And often the case, people will try to do, we'll try to fit you in.
Mm-hmm.
But as a member in law diversity and inclusion is about that, just fitting in people who are different into a organization, a business, or so on. But it's not about making belongingness. And I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion, the D&I think there's a couple of other words that we need to add to that acronym, and that's equity and that's accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about equity, we're thinking about treating people all people in a just and fair way, and removing the barriers so that they can be treated fairly.
Mm-hmm.
And then accessibility is just giving access to all people, no matter their ability or their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we think about it those ways, the acronym then would be inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, IDEA.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
So then we think about it that way, we're now thinking about how do we make people feel like they belong rather than just being a compliance issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but how does that relate to socializing? I know you had talked about some of the people, particularly those who've been blind since birth, lacking the experience that you had because you were a person who had sight. Then you understood the importance of networking and socializing and going out to receptions and events.
Yep.
But that your peer group who haven't had that experience don't understand its value. I understand that's one of your advocacies.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that once you feel like you belong, and that whether every aspect of the social, going out and socializing, and you feel like you belong, you'll be more likely to go out there. I think that too often people in the disability community feel that, hey, I'm not going to be as welcomed. The experience is not going to be great for me, and it may not be good for you with me. So I don't want to let you down. I don't want to ruin your evening. But if we change that and say, how can social life, social nightlife experience be belonging for everyone? Then that's going to get people out there. And one of my big things is I'm all about creating employment. But once you have employment, there is that social aspect. You need to be able to enjoy the cities that you live in and be able to really have that quality of life, not just have that work, but we need to make sure every aspect of life is.
Well, that's a good conclusion, and I hope we've accommodated and made you feel belonged here.
Oh yeah, no, it's been an amazing experience. I would say that you and Alicia really, before coming here, made me feel that I try to make this experience as inclusive as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And Marjorie, she made it an equitable experience for me, and really made me give me the access to everything here.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.